Good evening. It's great to see a full room. It's the first full room we've had for a joint board meeting in quite some time. So thank you, everybody, for taking your time to come out and speak tonight, attend the presentations that we have. We have a number of educators who are here with us. The gentleman on the screen, his name is Adam Rubin. He is the CEO of Tommy Parker of Two Revolutions, which is an education design company that has assisted us in building together our balanced scorecard, our portrait of an educator, as well as several other plans and system reforms that we're looking to move forward with to better the education we offer all of our students across SAU 16. Tonight is a glimpse into how the district administration, the school administration, and all of our educators working together with our school boards and our community members. We're going to hold ourselves accountable for advancing the education of students. The balanced scorecard is something that we have as an accountability measure, not necessarily a report card per se, but something that helps us measure growth. And if you give me a moment, I'm just going to ask Adam to go ahead and start that slide for me. So Adam, if you could share that screen, I would greatly appreciate that, sir. We can certainly hear you.
Let's see if we can get a screen up here.
Perfect.
All right, I think I'm there.
Excellent. So we can move us to the top slide.
You got it.
Great. Slide us down one.
You got it. All right. And maybe another.
We'll go one more.
Okay, perfect.
Great. Thanks so much, Adam.
You are welcome.
So a moment to innovate. When we talk about innovation, we talk about the way our students are learning, which ultimately will help change the way that our teachers are teaching. It's an adaptation process. Teachers are on board with wanting to do that because what we've discovered in our competency-based education planning, that the rewards far outweigh any of the work that goes into making this happen. And it's a ton of work. The educators that you're going to hear from this evening are going to talk about how we believe that we're going to help our students, our staff, and our system grow through this growth model by holding us accountable to statistics that we're looking at, but also feedback from members of the community, students, family members, staff members, etc. There are two ways that we intend on moving forward. One is through our competency-based system. This is a system that was instituted in state regulations in 2005 by the New Hampshire State Board of Education. At the time, it was not necessarily a mandatory regulation. The regulation actually read, all school districts shall have plans for competency-based learning in their school districts. And it wasn't until 7 or 8 years later, when those regulations were changed, that required credit to be earned through competency-based education, that school districts really started to do this work in earnest. Local SAU 17 began to do that work, the Sanborn Regional School District. SAU 16 dove into that work. And these two districts, as well as a few others from around the state, really dug in and have made great advances in competency-based learning. But part and parcel with competency-based learning is this issue of equity. And what equity means is that those of us that are working within this framework is that all students have the same opportunities to the same educational opportunities, regardless of where they live, where they come from, what they look like, who they sound like, etc. And so we believe in a diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice framework for all of our students. That also means in our hiring practices, it means in working with community members, it means in governance. And so part of what you'll see tonight when we talk about the balanced scorecard is holding ourselves accountable to that. There are definitely some different structures that we'll be introducing tonight, and there might be some concepts that we introduce that may be new. I hope they're new to you. Adam, would you mind terribly advancing to that next slide? Thank you. And we've been following this plan of architecture to transform. And transform for us really means taking all of the good that we already have going and building upon that, and looking at our opportunities that perhaps we're not doing very well at. And how can we strengthen that? How can we pick up in those areas that are going to help all of our students, particularly those students who struggle the most, that perhaps we're not reaching because of some systems that we have in place, or policies that we have in place. And so this is a way for us, through the architectural model, to rebuild and transform what it is we're doing from the inside out. So we started with a portrait of a graduate, and that work was done several years ago. That's essentially the most important aspect of the work we do. What does it look like when a student walks out of this school, across the stage, on that football field, right behind us, like they did this past Saturday, and go out into the world to become productive citizens? Whether that means going on to college, to learn how to go into a career, whether they go into a trade, or whether they go into the military, or any combination thereof. That is our most important number one goal, is what is the blueprint for that? How do we know we're doing really well? Then we developed the portrait of an educator. This ties directly into how we achieve number one, the portrait of the graduate. You're going to hear from teachers this evening on the development of the portrait of an educator. It's an evaluation and growth model that works from an asset-based system, not a deficit-based system. For many of you, evaluation has always been something that's been equated to, here's what I saw that I liked, here are all the areas that you really need to get better at. As opposed to what we'd like to move forward with, let's use what I saw and what you're doing based on your professional goals in relation to student learning to build on that and generate more positivity out of those other opportunities. So we're going to use what you're already showing to move forward, not necessarily trying to correct anything that used to be considered a deficit in your teaching. As far as portrait of a leader, we currently have a leadership competency map, and that's also based on growth model. What we would like is for all of our leaders, that being the SAU senior leadership team, our principals, our assistant principals, directors, and assistant directors, are following along a continuum of growth that helps them to improve where they want to go with what they're doing currently. Very similar to what we're doing with our educators. So moving on this continuum of growth towards competency-based leadership that really centers around three specific principles. The one that we believe to be the most important, equity. Equity in leadership and empathy. And then finally, the balanced scorecard, which we'll be sharing with you this evening. We have a group of educators as well as some students. That was a work over the last year that involved this joint board. It involved community members, parents, students, staff members, other district employees, and it's been worked on for the past, I would say, 12 or 13 months. If I'm not mistaken, Esther, I'm looking over it. Yeah, thank you. When this originally began, because we were trying to find a way that we could be held more accountable in a very transparent and frequently published way for everyone to know, essentially, how do we know we're doing well as compared to other districts around us? How do we know we're doing well? And so we want to be held accountable to these specific tenets that are moving forward this year. And so tonight, we're going to have that presentation for you. We're going to share that information with you. And I'm going to ask Adam to take us along the next batch of slides before we get into that part of the presentation. Adam, it's all yours.
Excellent. All right, good evening, everybody. Sorry I can't be with you in person. What I'd like to do is very briefly just describe what is a balanced scorecard. So a balanced scorecard is something that's been happening throughout corporate America for a long time. It made a leap about 12 to 15 years ago into a number of different higher ed institutions around the country, and then some very forward-thinking districts around the country, including some that Two Revolutions is working with, began to use these. So quite simply, it's a process and a tool that just transparently shares a wide range of data with the broader community annually. I think one of the reasons that districts embark on this is because the traditional measures of keeping score are insufficient. And for a forward-thinking district like SAU 16, that's really trying and working hard to pursue competency-based education and diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice, the traditional metrics fall far short. So this becomes a process to engage a broad group of stakeholders in really ultimately defining how you measure success. What is success? It's your portrait of a graduate, and how will you know you're achieving it? So it's important because every community of taxpayers, whether they have students in school or not, deserves to understand what's working and where areas of growth for the district. It really helps to kind of track these core strategies publicly, transparently, and from a learning perspective. So here's what we're doing well, and when we get the data back at the end of the first year, here's what we're going to do about it. And then in a lot of districts that are using this, and a lot of higher ed partners we have, they use this as a way to externally make the case for how to direct funding streams. So the balanced scorecard plays a lot of different functions. I don't imagine, because I've been in that cafeteria a lot, that these slides, hopefully these slides will be made available to you as a resource. I just wanted to paste some pictures. The first one I want to say is from a district right outside of Chicago on the left. The other is a district we're working with about 40,000 students in Texas, Exeter County. The details are unimportant, but the reason I wanted these slides in here is just to show the idea of the district has a baseline of data, and you're going to hear about these specific metrics from teachers and students and board members over the coming minutes. And then you set target goals for subsequent years, so you can really see your progress toward or your lag against the goals you set. This is a reference slide that, as you get these slides for reference, there are a few articles we put in here on balanced scorecards, and then there's a couple of examples from Atlanta, from Park Ridge, Illinois, from Exeter County, Texas, just so as you are curious about what these look like in different school districts, you can take the theoretical approach through some articles, or you can take some of these links directly to these balanced scorecards from some American districts. As Dave said, the timeline began well before February. Throughout the summer and fall, there was engagement with building leaders, with admin leaders, with teachers throughout the system. In the fall, there was an engagement with this joint board around the balanced scorecard. And we really were trying to crowdsource metrics. Like, what are the things that you think are the most important things to track? A subcommittee of about 30 students, parents, board members, teachers, and leaders from across the SAU began working on this in February, where they took all of that data from all of those sources, and then they began to iterate on that data. Over the course of the spring, they began to refine those metrics, and then really began to finalize those for recommendations to implement and to bring this process to all of you tonight. These four principles really governed everything you're about to hear, and this was the screen through which we called questions and tried to sharpen the thinking. So first and foremost, the expectation is that every metric you see is in some way aligned with the portrait of a graduate. And everyone who knows me in the room you're in tonight will know that I often refer to the poster. Every district we work in the country and lots of states we work with have portraits, and they're lovely posters, or they're on the website, but they're not worth anything unless they really are driving what's happening in classrooms, what's happening in buildings, what's happening with policy. So first and foremost, every metric is trying to further your ability to implement and measure the realization of your portrait for graduate, for every learner in the system. Second of all, every metric has to be measured empirically. So we have to get attainable quantitative or qualitative data. So we really were thinking about what is feasible around the data we are seeking. Is it feasible to actually get it? Next, this is really, every metric is trying to move toward the district's coherence framework. What is a coherence framework? It's just something the district uses to focus its efforts. And in the case of SAU 16, at the admin leadership level, for the past number of years, you all have used kind of the core principles of competency-based ed. And then finally, we don't care about activities when we think about metrics like X number of teachers were trained or Y number of students did this. We really care about outcomes, not activities. So this was kind of what governed what eventually made it onto the metrics and what sharpened the focus of the metrics. Again, for reference, this is your portrait of a graduate, so we really took this apart and used this as a way to think critically. So you talk about wanting competent learners, you talk about a range of skills around learner engagement, around problem solving, around communication, understanding the value of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and then a set of mindsets: perseverance, resilience, confidence, empathy. So we really looked at these and thought about the things that could actually measure attainment of these knowledge, skills, and mindsets. And then I alluded to this a minute ago. These are the 7 principles as put out by kind of one of the top competency-based policy and think tank organizations, an organization called Aurora Institute. So these are 7 research-based principles around competency-based education. All right, pass back to you. I think I'm going to pass to Christopher.
He's coming.
All right. Well, while he's coming, the final thing I'll share is that the subcommittee really decided to focus these metrics into 3 types of metrics. So the majority of the metrics are focused on growing our students. A smaller set of metrics are focused on growing our educators. And then a final set of metrics are looking at things from more of a macro perspective, and it's about growing our system. So I believe Chris is going to speak to growing our students with a couple of committee members.
Thank you, Adam, and thank you for attending tonight and allowing us to have this presentation. I was lucky enough to work probably the last 6 months with 8 other individuals on how we would measure growing our students and looking at it through a traditional approach, but a non-traditional approach. So it gave a better message of what our students embody, but from when they enter in kindergarten and then when they graduate as a senior. So on that committee, I want to thank Ron Q, principal at Swayze, Casey Hamilton, first grade teacher in Newfields, Don Peck, third grade teacher at Lincoln Street School, Mark Toby, math teacher at Exeter High School, Camilla Thompson, community member and parent, and Sophia DeFabio, who would have been here tonight but is doing her UNH orientation, so congratulations, Sophia. To talk more about the metrics that we use, I want to bring up Patrick Joyce, teacher at Cooperative Middle School, and Exeter Board member Jenny Leonard, so they can talk about the metrics that we are going to look at to identify our student growth within our system. So Patrick and Jenny, I believe Jenny's up first to talk about some of the traditional approaches, and then Patrick will get to the non-traditional metrics. So Jenny.
Thank you, Chris. So I'm going to speak to the first 2 metrics that we're going to be looking at when we look at the portrait of a graduate and how we are going to be assessing our students and their growth. The first one is just simply what percentage are attaining on-time graduation. For most, that would be 4 years, but obviously accounting for longer where appropriate. But in addition, looking at where students are 4 years after graduation. So for some that might be college, but for others, they might be in the workforce, they might be in the service. Next we have, for those who have chosen the traditional post-secondary college path, we would be using the National Student Clearinghouse to see the percent of students who are engaged in 2 or 4 year programs, the percentage who have completed a traditional program, and then also we'll be looking at the percentage of increase over time. for those two things. Our third metric looks at how many students are taking advantage of dual enrollment opportunities. These are in-house college credit eligible classes. So we'll be looking at the percentage of eligible students who choose to take those classes, then from there, the percentage of those students who are earning the credits, and then again, the percentage of increase in both year after year. So then we have the world of work experience, which is pretty broad. It can include extended learning opportunities, internships, career and technical ed, and jobs, etc. So this could look like participation in an SST program, but it can also look like if you take a student who is, say, actively engaged in the athletic program, so like a three-sport athlete, who now starts to work with the gym teacher to demonstrate those competencies so that they can then free up room in their schedule to devote more time to preparing for academic classes or to pursue electives that speak to their interests and passions. So we'll be looking at how many students take advantage of these opportunities, how that number increases over time, and also we're going to utilize student and family survey data as we go along. These opportunities, especially the fourth metric, they expose students to valuable experiences outside of school, but they can also give us a glimpse into how engaged students are in their personal interests by watching how they pursue them. It can give students an opportunity to take ownership in their experience at school and tailor their educational experience to what truly works for them as individuals. So these situations help to inform us on the whole child development of each student. Patrick?
All right, and thank you, Jenny. I'm actually going to shut this microphone off and pass it to Dr. Ryan. All right, so the four metrics that I'm going to explain relate to portfolio defense, student-led conferences, student perception data, and